Hello and welcome again to Conscious TV. I'm Iain McNay and today in the studio is Kenneth Madden. Hi Kenneth.
Hi Ian.
And Kenneth has come over from Ireland for the day to talk to us on non-duality. And it's interesting how we found Kenneth because we do get a lot of emails in every day with suggestions, and someone did suggest Kenneth. And he actually hasn't written a book. He doesn't do lectures or workshops. He doesn't even do private sessions. But there was one audio interview that we heard that thought there's something interesting here, so we invited him across. So, Kenneth, let's, just like we normally do in Conscious TV, let's just get a feel of your early days, if you like. I think as a child you were quite happy, weren't you?
Yeah, a very happy childhood. Very much so, yeah. Very active childhood. Grew up in Galway, in the west coast of Ireland, and just very out a lot, and a lot of sports and friends, and yeah, it's good.
And then as you got a bit older, you started to feel a bit separate. I think you were quite into sport, and but you were still playing sport, but there was a gap somehow beginning to appear. Is that right?
Yeah, I was telling this to your researcher. I suppose it was just to try and draw on memories of when you were going to talk about the story here today. So there was just some things that occurred to me growing up. I suppose I had a very happy childhood, and then I remember as very normal, I think, for as I entered my teens more, you know, that angsty teen feeling, and that got quite intense, I think. And I just had a memory of playing team sports and, you know, getting along well with everyone, but yet feeling on the outside of the team, which I found interesting to reflect back on now, you know.
And also in the notes that you sent beforehand, you said that you felt that you weren't seeing life as it truly was.
Yeah, it's hard to verbalize that, but there was definitely a sense of that. It was something. There was definitely kind of a sense there's something been lost between, say, being a child and entering into early adulthood, kind of teenage years. That was quite apparent, and I was interested. I remember being interested in that sense of kind of childlike wonder and kind of awe at the world, I suppose, you know, that everything was exciting. And I have a memory of kind of wondering, you know, when did it stop being wonderful and interesting, and not interesting, but that awe, when did that all go, or why did it go, you know? Yeah.
And then you read something, did you? I think there's an Irish poet, and he's.
Oh, okay, yeah. I remember watching. We have a show called The Late Late Show. It's a very famous Irish show, and it's on a Friday night. And we lived in 2 channel land there for growing up, you know, for quite a number of years, you know. So you had to watch The Late Late Show. And I remember Brendan Kennelly being on it. He's quite a famous Irish poet, and he said that words are nothing. And there was a pause, and I just remember being struck by that comment, and I didn't know why. I just really kind of hit me, you know. And I just remember that when talking to your researcher about my childhood, and that's something that definitely jumps out, because I'd say I probably had a feeling of kind of struggling with words, or feeling that words were maybe inadequate to try and express things, or there was something maybe that couldn't be expressed through words, or, you know. So yeah.
So you're realising the limitation.
The limitation of words probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I probably didn't delve into it too much, like into linguistics or anything. I just remember that having a punch to it when I heard it, and I didn't read any Brendan Kennelly till only maybe a year, 2 years ago, and I was really blown away by his poetry as well. It's really irreverent and beautiful poetry as well, you know. But I remember when I first picked him up thinking how he'd struck a chord all those years earlier.
And there's also a period, I think, where you felt you moved away from God.
Yeah, I suppose just a feeling of, we do our communion and confirmation, and, you know, everyone does it over there, but having thought about God, and then thinking that maybe he wasn't around anymore, where that was never an issue before. Do you know what I mean? And then starting to think, was there a God at all? Or do you know what I mean? Yeah, it's
So
something that occurred to me.
There was a period of questioning going on, wasn't there?
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was just as I entered my teens and I became kind of more self-conscious, and I think I probably I was a little bit angry as a teenager as well, as teenagers often are, and those kinds of things were floating around for me. Another thing that I would have thought about was time. I remember thinking very often about time, and when did the present become the past was the thing. Where was the boundary on that? You know what I mean? And I remember at the time describing it as maybe there's just one long moment, and those were the words. They're the only words I could kind of find to describe what I was trying to get at the time. Yeah.
And then when you left school, you went travelling for a few years. And one of the things that in the biographical notes you sent that stuck with me was you went to Guatemala, I think it was, Central America.
I did, yeah.
And you just talk us through what you did. It sounds a bit gruesome on the face of it.
Oh yeah. It's, I went to Guatemala. It's a really long story to how I ended up there, but I suppose for love and adventure and all these things, and I ended up down in Guatemala, and I worked with a forensic anthropologist because I lived in the Western Highlands in a small village, and an American man who was a forensic anthropologist lived there. So I befriended him and was fortunate enough to go along with him on some of the work he was doing, and ended up staying with the team for a period of time, and essentially really it was work to exhumate the graves from the time of the Civil War. So you're looking at kind of 80, 81, the height of the violence, and there would have been mass graves, and when you talk about it, it sounds so morbid, and it really wasn't at all. It was a really amazing experience because I suppose there would have been 99, 2000, so you're finding bones and clothes, really, just bones and clothes. So it's not as if that's all you're finding essentially. So there's no stench of dead bodies or so on. But also the fact that when we're looking for them, the local people come along, and you end up talking to them, and they're looking for their loved ones, so they can have a ceremony and bury them again. And it was actually a very positive experience. Yeah.
But you also said you saw suffering you'd never seen before.
Yeah, well, I suppose I thought about suffering a lot. When you go to a third world country, I think you see a whole other level of suffering when you see kids that are malnourished and bad skin and all of that kind of thing, and it's uncomfortable, but and also the people who had been murdered, you'd find bones that had been broken several times over maybe a period of a year. So someone might have been tortured for a year and then buried, and you're trying to get your head around that kind of level of suffering and things like that.
What human beings can do to
exactly,
each other.
Yeah, what we're capable of. And yeah.
And I think at that point you started to question who you were. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? I'm just going through the notes that you sent.
I know, yeah. I would say that as I went into my early 20s, kind of, early mid 20s, I think I became kind of almost like a mild depression. I'm self-diagnosing now, I don't know, but a little bit low, and a huge amount of energy on reflection was put into presenting a face to people that everything was fine, and whereas really I was quite low at the time for over quite a number of years, I'd say, and so I wouldn't say that I specifically thought about who I was, or was investigating that actively, But from this perspective now, you know, when you are experience yourself to be a separate individual in the world, there's always a search, because there's the feeling that something's been lost. So there's a search for wholeness. So whether that search takes the form of spirituality or some other form, be it traveling or, you know, even doing drugs or whatever, it's actually all essentially the same search for this for wholeness.
It's knowing that something is not complete, but not knowing
Yes.
what it is
Yes.
or how to complete it.
Exactly, yeah. There's something missing. There isn't anything missing, but there feels as though for the separate individual, it absolutely feels that there's something missing.
Yeah.
And you can't put your finger on it. You don't know what it is. You will never know what it is, actually, but there's a searching for that, what has apparently been lost. So all of that period of time when I talk about that story, and incidentally, I suppose it's interesting to talk about the story, and I know people want to hear about the story, but the story actually has no significance whatsoever. Which is interesting, because it's totally unique, just as your story, Iain, is unique, and a viewer who's going to watch this, their story is totally and utterly unique. So, but talking about this story here, there's no pointers to anybody to say, okay, so this happened for him, so maybe if I do that, because nothing actually leads to anything.
No, so, I understand that, but I also think that this is a key thing in a way, because we all, I can't speak for everybody, I can speak for myself, I can speak for a lot of people I've talked to about it. I think virtually everybody all the time feels something lacking. Now, there's levels of that, obviously, and some people may be mildly depressed, other people very depressed, other people happy, but it's not quite it, except in short periods. But we're all, as personalities, egos, in the human story, as you would put it, we're all in the same dilemma, that we're feeling incomplete and we're looking for just that thing that's going to complete us.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's really what drives the individual. It's that yearning that drives the individual and what the individual appears to be doing, be it meditating, be it drinking, be it, you know, being a successful businessman, be it whatever it is. It's that drives the individual. And all the time, what's really interesting is that all the time it's always something else. It always has to be something else. It's always, oh, if I meditate now, you know, maybe I'll have this realization and be in this space. So really, it's a total rejection of this, just what's happening. It's continuously rejected, because as a separate individual, really, there's a false sense of being a center in the world. So there's me and there's the world out there. So it's really kind of like a subject-object kind of thing. So you're the subject and everything else is an object. And so the individual will always see something, will only ever see something, will only ever see an object, right? And actually what's being looked for is nothing, is what you are. Because there is nothing is everything. But as a false center, you're only seeing something. So really you're only seeing 50% all the time. You know. Yeah.
Well, there's this part of me that wants to finish your story.
Okay, yeah.
So if that's okay.
Absolutely, well done.
So, something in me wants to complete your story. So there was then interest in developed in your story, in psychology and
Yeah, that would have
psychotherapy?
been going along in my teens and my early 20s. I read various things in that area, psychology, and um, I just had a general interest in the area. Yeah, yeah, and in just the human condition, I suppose, and it would have touched on things like, say, Ken Wilber's No Boundary, and found that interesting, but never really delved too much into the spiritual side of things.
And then you went, when you were about 28, you went on a 5-day Vipassana retreat.
That's right, yeah.
And something appeared to happen on the third day.
Yes, yeah. A good friend of mine recommended Vipassana, and I just thought, oh, that sounds like it'll work for me, a bit of R&R really, and just a bit of a break away, and just sounded good. And I went along, and huge pain arose, huge pain in the body, physical pain and emotional pain. And on about the third day, it was just, I wasn't there. There was just this. And at the time, I described it as a veil being lifted. That's the only words I could find. And that I saw that where I had always been was what I'd always been looking for. So it had never, ever left me. And that was the big surprise.
What you'd always been.
Where, yeah, just
explain
simply,
that a little bit more depth.
So simply life, which had never left me. Had always been, everything I'd done had been in that, was actually what I'd always been looking for. Just life, just ordinary, and the ordinariness of it was absolutely stunning. It's just this, and it's almost like there's laughter. I've been just looking for this. So it was amazing. I can't really describe it, obviously, but that's as close as I can come.
So what was in front of you and you saw in that moment was what you felt you'd always been looking for but hadn't seen before.
Yeah.
Am I getting this right?
Yeah. That, I suppose, another way, I'd always been looking for home, and I'd always had been home. This was always home. Just ordinary, everyday life. And I remember tying my shoelace then and being struck by how I'd never done that before. I'd never done that before. Whereas before, or maybe, you tie your shoelaces every day, but it was like everything was new. Everything was new. There was no past, no future. There was just this, and everything was new.
And the pain in your body, what happened to that?
It left, and things arose and they came, and they arose and they came, and After that, I thought I had an experience. I suppose that was the point of it. I thought this is actually, I was trying to describe it as an experience. Kind of was very unsatisfying for me, because it was no other experience had ever touched it, or come close to what it was. And then I discovered subsequently that it wasn't actually an experience at all, and nothing had actually happened. Which was a big revelation, because I suppose after that had happened, I think, oh, okay, I'm on a Buddhist retreat. This is the most amazing, mind-blowing thing that ever, words don't come close. So then it must have been this Buddhist meditation. So then I read around Buddhism, and I continued to meditate and all of that stuff. But I was always struck by the feeling that this is it. So how can I approach this? If I'm meditating in the morning and then I'm walking down the road, it felt to me, this is the same as meditating. There was no boundary on it, So all of the spiritual texts I read were just left me very unsatisfied. They weren't really coming close to what. And then, of course, part of me wanted to latch on to things, and might have fleetingly, but then just didn't hold anything for me, So I suppose the language I would use around that now is that there was an awakening, and after the awakening, I was back looking to claim the experience, to own the experience, to have the experience again, to make it a constant in my life, to integrate it into my life, all of these things. And then was spent about a year, I'd say, reading various different people, from, you know, Krishnamurti to the usual suspects, really, like, and trying to, for people who are, particularly people who are maybe less dogmatic, and because I very much felt that you can't approach this, so there is no path, and there is no teacher. I was very much aware there was no teacher. There couldn't be a teacher, because what I had saw was just ordinary life, and there's no way it could possibly be taught. It didn't need to be taught. You know?
How did this affect your working life, your day-to-day life?
I'd say from the outside, I probably withdrew into myself a bit, because it became quite intense. I would have meditated a lot, read a lot of books, and there was probably an intensity around it, you know, and that's what many people would call a spiritual seeker. I probably would have been, you could have labelled me nicely as that for that period. But yet it was very, you know, just wasn't hitting the right note with me at all, you know, anything I came across, really. And then I saw Tony Parsons on YouTube, and then it was like, okay, that's it. And that was the first person I'd heard to verbalise it in such a way.
So Tony Parsons
in an uncompromising way, yeah.
Has also been on Conscious TV at
yes,
one
that's
point.
Right, yeah.
Sat in this very sofa
that
you're sitting on.
Yeah.
And what was it about Tony that...
it's nothing I can say or verbalise. It was just immediately a resonance with what was said, you know, just a resonance of like, okay. And then I remember watching him on YouTube and thinking every time I watched the same clip was new. It was just, I'd never seen this clip before, kind of thing. And that was, to me, was resonating with what had happened a year previously, what I thought had happened. And then it became, I went to a meeting, an open secret meeting, and it was just clear then at that point that really what had happened was not a happening, and was actually a loss of me. I had fallen away. And when I wasn't there, there was just completeness, just wholeness, just unconditional love. And then I came back trying to claim it.
So what do you mean by when I wasn't there?
There is no separate individual. There's the really felt feeling in the body. It's a contracted energy of being a separate person in the world. But it's not real. In a way, you could say it's real and unreal, because it's real in the sense that it feels real, like it really does feel real that there's a world out there and I'm negotiating it and everything, but it's absolutely unreal, which the mind gets very frustrated with, because it's like either you tell me it's real or it's unreal, but how can it be both, you know? But that's the closest I could come to it. So then it's really, I suppose, from this perspective, when as a child, when that contraction happens into a separate me and the world out there, like you expressed very well earlier, there's that longing then for a sense there's something not quite right, there's something kind of missing, and that becomes very apparent as you get older, because you're working and you think I suppose it's kind of like this arrival, isn't it? You feel like you're going to arrive when I get the house or when I get the job, and you never do or kind of arrive, you know. You're always kind of striving for something or moving towards something that's never quite so you never get there, you know. And that's that whole feeling of feeling separate.
So your mind is still going, but you don't believe your mind. You don't... How does that work?
Well, thoughts arise, you know. It's the same thing. That's the stunning thing about it. There's only life. There's not my life, you know. There's just life. That's all, and it's whole and complete. And so thoughts arise and they fall away again, just as everything arises and falls away again, like an experience, a feeling of happiness is there and then it's gone again. The difference is there's nobody here owning it. There's nobody here, oh, this is my thought, this is my feeling. And that whole feeling that of me is an illusion. So really, it's an addition. There's just this, there's just life, which is complete. Being is a nice word, I think. And then in that arises the feeling of being a separate life. So there's life, and then there's me with my little life. So there's 6 billion of us going around with our little lives, you know, and then there's life outside of that. And it's a dream.
And so I know that you I think you do social work in Ireland. So how is that for you when you are working with people maybe in quite difficult situations? What is happening? Because there needs to be obviously sensitivity, responsibility. Does that arise on its own?
Absolutely, yeah. There's the funny thing about this, and when you hear people talking about this, is when it's seen, it's like doing a 360-degree turn. So you're back to where you always were, but everything is just new. So things go on as they did before. So the social work job goes on, and it's a role in the story. So the role is fulfilled in the story, and there's apparently meeting needs. So a need arises, and there's apparently someone here meeting the need, but here it's seen that there's just that's just life happening. There's nobody in that doing that.
And so when there's difficult, what we would call as human beings, difficult situations personally, you are just, you're not watching it because you're not separate. The difficult situations arising, and there's nothing that's really affected.
No, the whole thing is, I suppose, the story is only apparently real. So what we think of things of experiences and things happening is only it's both real and unreal. So I suppose I'm back to the earlier point. We're only seeing 50% because we, as a subject, you're seeing an object. You're only seeing something. You're not seeing the no thing.
Yeah.
So, I got a bit lost there now. What was your point?
Well, my point was when there was some difficult situation that most people would spend some time thinking it through to let's say.
Oh yeah, I remember now. Yeah. So that difficult situation is only apparently happening. That's the point I was trying to make. So it's only apparently happening. It's both real and unreal. There seems, though, to the individual that there is most definitely a problem, and there's something most definitely happening here, whereas it's both real and unreal.
Have you no concern? Is there no concern about the survival of your human body? If you get sick or
sickness, the body gets sick. There's just this body-mind organism, which is before was apparently bound by skin. So there was an inner and an outer. There was a me in here somewhere knocking around, bounded by my skin, and there was an outer world out there. Whereas now there is no inner and there is no outer. There's just body, mind, which does a really good job of protecting itself. Obviously, if someone came along and hit me, I'd have I could be fairly sure I'd probably hit them back and defend myself. Do you know what I mean? Knowing the conditioned body organism that's here. But when actually this is seen, the character is freed to be totally full and just totally free, because there's nobody judging it and pulling it and saying there's no value judgment on everything and analysing everything anymore, because there's simply just life happening.
But does your character change?
No, it's nothing to do with the character, Ian. It's nothing to do with how you think you are, how you think other people think you are. It's nothing to do with being a kind person, being a good person, being an asshole, being a bad person. It's absolutely nothing to do with that. It's just simply seen. It's the shift into seeing that you are life. You are all that is. So therefore the character, life embraces, it's unconditional love. And unconditional love embraces all that is, because it is all that is. It is the guy who's the asshole. It is the guy who's a really loving, kind guy. So it embraces everything. It doesn't, the character, that's the way we live our lives. We feel like we move through life and I'm not, I need to be a bit more thoughtful, or I need to be a bit more centered in myself, or we're always inadequate. We always feel we're not quite there. And that really is, as you said earlier, it's going back to that yearning. We feel unworthy because we feel something's been lost, when in fact nothing has been lost at all. It's just this. It's complete. That's the divine. That's the divine comedy. Really, is that when this is seen, is that what you have always been looking for has always been.
I'm going to keep going on this because it's something I'm not clear on. And what comes to mind is there's a book which I think is one of the most moving books I've ever read. It's by a guy called Bo Lozoff, and he works a lot with prisoners in America, with people in prison in America, and some of the people that he interacts with, they're mass murderers. I think one of them has killed 16 people. These are serious. These are people who've done on the level of the human level seriously bad things.
Yeah.
And a lot of the book is just a series of letters from him to them, and he's very non-judgmental. He just says what comes up for him. They say what happens for them, and some of them have had real awakenings, taking your order, awakenings in prison, and they now see through the veil of separateness. I don't know whether they're fully enlightened or whether there is full enlightenment or whatever, but something fundamentally changes, and at the same time their character changes, and there is a kind of remorse, it seems, not so much that they are saying I did a terrible thing, but seeing there's an inappropriateness of the previous character. And this is the point that I'm interested in with you. It is the things that have changed, not because you have wanted to change them, but are the things that dropped away that are inappropriate in your character?
Probably the neurosis of being a separate self drops away. And I think I hear that a lot. There's a huge amount of energy and neurosis in just guarding yourself and as this separate entity in life, and negotiating through life and thinking you have to relate, that I have to relate to you now, and you're a separate person and I'm relating to you, and then all these calculations. I wonder what Iain thinks of me, and I wonder am I saying the right thing, and I wonder how this interview is going, and blah 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 blah, and it goes on and on and on, and it's just total neurosis, and it's completely connected comes from the sense of being a separate self. So that drops away, so it's just a much freer place in that sense, but the character itself doesn't change.
But isn't the character to some extent stored in the computer of the mind?
No, there's a body mind character that's from conditioned to liking chocolate and preferring peppermint tea over rooibos tea, which I didn't get, or whatever. Do you know what I mean? And there's preferences, and that's all it is, really. I think what you're just on your point about inappropriate things, a huge amount of that would come from then feeling separate in the world. That feeling of separation.
Yeah. So could we say there's an essence of Kenneth that remains? There's a flavour.
There's fully there. My family, my friends. I'm the character Kenneth, and it's whatever they feel from me. I'm more the character Kenneth, actually. Interestingly enough.
So talk about that. Talk about how you're more.
Because there's nobody kind of thinking I should be one way over the other. It's just life happening. So the character is free to just be the character. Whereas before I would have felt maybe I'm not a good, I can't even think now what I'm trying to think of the things I used to think I should be, like be a good listener, for example, or I should be, it's full of shoulds, it's full of shoulds. It's like I should do this more, I should exercise more, I should, and all of them, that are just all gone,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I'm just reading the notes that I made from your notes, and you did say at some point there was an apparent period which you mentioned between awakening and liberation,
yeah, it
and
seems to
and
be.
this becomes more palpable as you talk. This
Yeah.
feeling of liberation rather than just
Yeah, I think that
awakening.
it seems to be that when there's an awakening, there's just an awakening, and it's like an expansive expansion out of a contracted sense of self, and then immediately the person, or directly after that, the person comes back to try and claim it, and I think that in this area of non-duality, um, which there, as I said, there's no thing such as non-duality, but in this whole area, I think there's two very distinct messages. One message is after that, there's been an awakening, there's clearly been an awakening, and then there's someone back, and then they start speaking about it, and there's an agenda, there's something offered to somebody. So there's a teacher and a student, which is what's the word I'm looking for? It's it's a circle. It feeds itself. Perpetuates. Yeah. There's no teacher without a student. There's no student without a teacher.
Yeah.
And the really interesting thing is that non-duality, as I think the center seems to be falling out of what we perceive as the world anyway. Politically, look at the internet. It's very amorphous. Is that the word? It's very there's no center to it. Or even if you take the music industry, we were talking about this earlier. There used to be this, the center of the record labels, and that's all kind of fallen away.
Yeah.
And I think non-duality has become very topical, and it's been spoken about in a lot now in all different areas, spirituality and everything. And for me, most of that is still meeting an agenda in the person. There's an agenda here, and it's meeting another agenda, which doesn't make it right or wrong. It just is what it is. It's perfect. But then there's another message that is totally uncompromising and offers nothing to the individual, offers no hope whatsoever. Because when you think of hope, it's always for something better. It's like, next week I hope this pain goes away because I'll feel better then, or whatever. And hope is a total and utter rejection of what is. So in an uncompromising message, it's a very uncomfortable message for an individual to hear, because it offers them nothing, and it recognizes them as being totally complete already, and totally unconditional love, that they are already unconditional love. There's nothing that needs to be done. So I think the reaction then to the message is usually either totally rejecting it because it's sensed very quickly, okay, this is the death of me, this message, I'm not having any of this. And there's a running away from the message back to what I know, whatever it is about, say, Buddhism, or these theories that I have, that I live my life, that I've integrated them in. Because when you meet this message, it's very threatening to all of that, because it's leaving you with nothing. And then or else what can happen is there's a hearing, the message isn't actually heard. It's very interesting. The message is, oh yeah, what you're saying then is, oh, that's Zen Buddhism, or that's, I don't know, I've heard all sorts of things, postmodernism, or it's whatever, non-duality, whatever it is. And there's a fitting of it into the thought structure and the conceptual model that is used, that runs the whole separate individual. Do you know what I mean? It's amazing how many times I, for instance, go into a Tony Parsons meeting, and you'd meet someone at the break and they'd start talking to you about what they're hearing, and you're just like, no, it's not what he's saying at all, it's really not being heard, or else you'd sometimes see a lot of anger. People get very angry because they feel threatened,
You also had in the notes that you sent about how, just reading it out here, notion the notion of living in the present and mindful awareness of false notions, because
Absolutely, yeah.
it's a doing. You would see that as a doing.
Again, it's speaking to an individual, who can be present. To say present implies there's a past and a future as well. What exactly is the present? And it's prescriptive is the word I'm looking for. A lot of these things are prescriptive, so they're telling you in one way or another what to do. Do you know what I mean? So you're not quite there yet, but I can tell you how to get there. You're not quite understanding what I'm hearing or getting what I'm hearing, but I can tell you what to do to get there. And that's perfect wheel to keep the story just turning and turning. The mind loves that. Keep going and going and going.
Yeah, you see, the other side of the coin is that intelligent people, a lot of intelligent people, as we discussed, see that life is incomplete. And they want to have that completeness. So they start looking and they start reading spiritual, psychological books. They meditate, they do yoga, I don't know what, people do all kinds of things. And in a way, there's an intelligence in that, because there's a recognition that things are not quite right the way they are. So there's a kind of, in their own way, they make a movement. I can include myself in this. A movement towards trying to find it. And what you're saying is that the movement's in the wrong direction. Are you saying there's nothing?
I'm saying the movement is it.
Good. Talk about that.
The movement is it. So if I think there's something to grasp, the very moving of trying to grasp it is already it. There's nothing to grasp, because this is it already. And what you said earlier is very interesting, because they're just there. They want to have it. Isn't that what you said? They feel incomplete, and they want to have this completeness.
They want to find it.
They want to find it, exactly, yeah. But it's a sense of them finding something, which is the whole problem, because there is no them.
Yeah.
It's that sense of me getting something. There's nothing to get. There's nothing to understand. There's nothing to own. I don't own anything. I don't know anything you don't know. It's not about knowing. It's not. Understanding is very much in the... it's an individual who understands. And that's another thing that in the world of non-duality is understand you're not separate. But it's the individual who understands. I know people who could express what I'm saying better than I can express it here. And there's not liberation.
Yeah.
Because they understand something.
Yeah, no,
it's personally owned thing. But the other thing, just that I thought of as you were saying that, it's there's nobody that's not searching and yearning for that. So when someone moves to make their life better, that's an intelligent thing to do. If you want to do meditation and feel more at home in the skin, then there's nothing wrong with that. Do whatever. That's an intelligent thing to do, I think. You know what I mean? It's certainly not about right or wrong, because there is no right or wrong, only apparently.
So do you feel silent sometimes?
No, silence.
Yeah.
No, I don't. I don't differentiate really. There's before, say, there would have been. I love music. I'm passionate about music, and there'd be, say, silence and music. But there isn't silence and music. There's silence, musicking. There's silence, sounding. There's nothing, being everything. It's the same thing. There's not life and death. There's nothing and everything. It's the same, just only appearing different. So there's not a sense now of anymore of there's a silence there and then there's something that's not silent. It's just all one. It's just all one. It's the same. It's the same. I suppose I keep coming back to nothing and everything. Nothing is everything is kind of the only way I can try and describe it. Whereas before, when you're a separate self, as I said earlier with the subject-object, when you're a subject, when you feel like a subject, a false centre of me, then you'll only see objects everything. This is a glass, a table, a cup, a person across from me here, a plant. Whereas you're not seeing the no thing, you're only seeing something. Whereas in actuality, there is only one whole life appearing as a separate individual called Ian, appearing as a cup. It's life cupping, life glassing, life eaning. You know, it's beautiful. It's totally free and boundless, and that's the way it always is. That's the way it is. But in that arises the feeling that it's not, that there's something been lost, that there's a me. You know.
So when you're looking at me,
Yeah.
you're seeing me,
Yeah.
and there isn't really a you looking.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
just looking,
There's just
happening.
seeing. There's just seeing, which is all there ever is anyway.
Yeah.
There's just seeing. If there's a sound of a camera there now. There's nobody hearing that sound here. There's just that sound. There's just what's happening. That's all there is. That's all there ever is. And we add me to it. Oh, I'm here in London doing an interview on Conscious TV and sitting on the couch talking to Ian, and it's nonsense. It's just life.
Well, I'm running out of words and questions. We've got about 5 or 6 minutes to go.
Okay.
So I don't know if anything else wants to come from where you're sitting.
Yeah. I suppose just on that point, what you're saying, come from where I'm sitting, or there's a perception in this that someone is speaking from a space, or they're speaking from a non-dual space, or this, you know, consciousness you're in or whatever, and it's totally misses the mark. There's nothing special about this. The mind wants it dearly to be special, but it's totally ordinary. It's stunningly ordinary. I mean, I think when I talk to people and hear, you know, on the internet now, it's brilliant. You can hear different accounts of awakening, say, or liberation, and that's one thing that strikes me is people. I think that's a lot of laughter comes from that. It's just stunningly. It's just so simply this. It's just this. You know, but the mind wants it to be special. The mind wants it to be fireworks, and that's a way of keeping the apparent separate self going all the time and not seeing what's right here in front of you, you know.
It's I think that the biggest barrier we probably all face is the mind is constantly going.
Yeah, it's nothing to do with understanding.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. And
the more I talk to you, the temptation. Although I do have a certain intellectual understanding and I have a certain feel, but it's kind of I'm still trying to. It's almost like I physically feel. I want to try and get it, you know, but I can't get it.
Yeah, because the individual wants to own things. It wants to own this.
Yeah.
And I see that a lot after awakening. There's an awakening. There's an individual then who wants to know. I'm not here. I want to be not here, and see that there's only this. Do you know what I mean? You want to own it. You want to own experiences and own everything. Yeah.
It's not that I want to own everything, and I think I can speak for quite a few people. It's like I want the difficulties of separation not to be there.
Yeah.
It's not that I want to grasp it, but I want that feeling of incompleteness not to be there.
I think that as we move through life, we really pull in pleasure and push out pain.
Absolutely true. Yeah.
So again, there's nothing wrong with this, but this is the way we do things. We'll try to make as comfortable a prison we're in this prison, apparent prison of individuality, to make it as comfortable as we can, which is, as I said earlier, as we were saying, is an intelligent thing to do. But so there's a constant rejection of, you know, that's painful. I don't want this, and I want this, and this is the constant struggle.
Yes.
When as actually pain is it as much as pleasure, because pain and pleasure, you only know one through the other. So it is the pain. That's the amazing thing about it. When pain arises, it's not that it's just some state where, you know, it's not detachment or being aware of the pain and seeing the pain. It is the pain, and it's bloody painful, and that's it. The problem is we feel it's my pain. This is my pain, and I want to get rid of it.
Yeah.
You know.
It's interesting. We had a couple of weeks ago. We had two women who sat on the sofa where you are, and they were actually doing we're doing a program about depression as a spiritual journey. And the thing I'm saying is from a completely different point of view. But when I asked them both what was the turning point with their depression, and they had serious depression. They'd written suicide notes. They were really finding things difficult, and they both said it was to do with acceptance, but the acceptance wasn't necessarily a doing. It was a kind of an allowing. And I'm not saying that's exactly what you're talking about. I feel it probably isn't. But there is this thing that an acceptance of whatever level it happens is somehow allowing and just getting as close as as you can be to being.
It is, yeah, but that's the whole thing, is getting close to being when all there is being, you know. Yeah. All there is already is being.
Yeah.
You know, you couldn't be any closer to what you're looking for. You could not be any closer.
Yeah.
It's more close than closeness, than intimacy. It's amazing, it's stunning. But it's, I suppose, it's kind of like that an acceptance of whatever's happening, but there's nobody accepting any. There's nobody there to say, you know, that I accept whatever happens to me. Do you know what I mean? But it is it's a delight in what's happening, no matter what's happening, and it's no longer is there the kind of vicissitudes of the ups and downs, and it's just that it's what the ups and downs are apparently happening in. So it doesn't really matter what's happening. Pain happens, and it's totally and utterly seen that it's complete, it's whole, it can't be any other way. There's nobody to push away the pain anymore. So it's full, it's very full, it's very full on life, you know. It's not like a state of kind of detachment or where you just, when you speak about that, someone accepting things, or it can sound similar to that, but that's not it. Actually, it's very full on, juicy.
Okay, well that's need to finish now. That's a good place to finish, being
juiciness,
full on and juiciness. The latest interpreted non-duality is full on and juicy. Yeah,
maybe that should be the name of my new website.
Okay, maybe that's what we call the program.
Yeah.
Okay, Kenneth, thank you very much for coming over from Ireland for the day to be with us in London.
My pleasure. Yeah.
And thank you everyone for watching Conscious TV, and I hope we see you all again soon. Goodbye.